What is up? Go FUD yourself. Happy Tuesday after the long weekend for some of us. Was a pretty busy weekend. You know, lots happening in the cryptoverse. Oh, I don't want to use a Ben Cow phrase, so not in the cryptoverse. Lots happening in crypto though. A lot of news, a lot of different things. It was a pretty interesting weekend for price action and different things. So we're going to dig into some of that. But JD Gagnon here, my good friend Kiara. What's up? What are we talking about today, my friend?
We're going to start with the crypto arms race because I can't help myself. I feel like at this point, I just call anything that has to do with any country the crypto arms race. But we have a few things about America, which is very exciting. And then we have something on a CBDC. If you missed our CBDC episode on Friday, go back and watch it. And then this is an update to that status quo already. And then we're going to talk about the future of crypto. There's some new upgrades coming out. There is some new research that has come out. We're ready.
Sweet. Let's do it. Okie dokie. Welcome back. So,
are there any like Easter eggs in the news? Did you find any hidden fun things over Easter?
Is that how you would like explain an Easter egg? Hidden and fun, or hidden and smelly? Maybe we found a lot of hidden smelly news news bits. I mean, I think there's some silver linings in some of this stuff. Although a lot of the silver lining in what's happening for crypto, in my opinion, is being caused by macro pain that we're going to see globally. And so maybe good for crypto, maybe long-term, maybe short-term, who knows? But definitely worth paying attention to. I wanted to say though, on the arms race thing, what's that movie? What's that Seth what's his name? The guy that was in Superbad.
You were asking the wrong person.
Oh, like he did this movie that he was like an arms dealer for the federal government and like had got into all these contracts and then had to fly over and was like, anyways, that's what I think of every time.
Whatever that movie is, I will go watch it. But
it sounds really awesome. I can't remember what his name is anymore.
Seth Rogen?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. He was the bigger guy, like the kind of the big dude in Superbad. Jonah Hill. Yes. Jonah Hill. Yes. So he did, I can't remember what the heck it's called, but it was a good movie. Anyways, unrelated. If anybody can, has any comments on that, send us a comment, send us a note. Remember, you can ask questions. We get DM
we actually got a bunch of questions on Friday, but it wasn't the live episode, so we didn't get
I was like, how did we not see those? So yeah, we will cover them. A lot of times we get questions via DM and stuff after the fact. So if you have questions, comment right under the live streams, and they come to us.
We get them live here.
Yeah, we can address them. So anyways, where do you want to start?
Crypto arms race. There's a lot of FUD about the States. We can't ignore it. There's almost everything that comes out about America right now is America killing crypto? And the answer is like, maybe, right? We talked about this a little bit before, that some people are calling it choke point 2.0. Some people are saying that America's purposefully stifling crypto. Some others try to say that they're trying to keep citizens safe, but the FUD kind of outweighs the hype here. So before we actually get into any of the news, how do you look at these articles? How can we address them in such a way that we aren't super FUDdy ourselves?
Yeah, I think this has just become a dominant narrative. And so if you haven't noticed, for the last 39 episodes, we've pretty much talked about this almost every episode, I think. And so I can't believe we're at 39. Anyways, so yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I don't think the US is doing anything particularly supportive at the moment for crypto. But it's abundantly clear, I think, to anybody paying attention that the US single-handedly cannot kill crypto. It's going to exist. What they can try to do is gate US people and entrepreneurs from participating in crypto while in the US. And they do that via a lot of these weird rules. The one with the tax rule, that they've actually already started talking about amendments to this and so on, because this actually in fact doesn't make sense. no business would have this type of treatment. And I think it was
the concept here, just, for anyone who didn't read the article themselves, the concept is that you have to amortize your R&D taxes over 15 years. Is that right?
I didn't read this particular article in super detail because I had already assessed this last week. But to sum up at a high level, I don't know the exact particulars, but essentially right now you can write off your R&D expenses, including development, in the year that you incurred them. And this is important because for the first few years of running blockchain protocols, effectively you are running at a net loss. It's like every other tech company ever. You're running at a net loss. But what you have to do is when you take investment dollars in, those are taxable if you don't offset them with expenses in the first 24 months as a US company. Asterisks. But that like currently you raise some funds, then you've got 24 months to write them off. Otherwise the raised funds are taxable. Well, this in effect would make raised funds taxable with no offsetting expenses, which doesn't make sense. Like there's a reason that all other startups have the first 2 years to write off their investment dollars. There's a reason for that. Many countries, you have to do it in the same year. So you receive investment dollars 1 year, you got to try to find as many write-offs as you can. Now, of course, if I was the IRS, I'd be looking at those write-offs and being like, hey, are these actual expenses related to the business? Totally get that. But this will just completely crush any potential for any domestic. It would make you non-competitive.
So this particular law, just for domestic versus international, it's supposed to be if you're a software company, you have 5 years in which you need to amortize the R&D. And if you work internationally, but then you're an American company doing R&D internationally, it's 15 years. So the idea is that they want that investment to be here in America, but they haven't really thought about it in a way that's particularly encouraging.
Yeah, this isn't going to work at all. Like all that's going to happen is we literally all are going to move offshore. Like if that's what they want, but the problem is you kind of can't. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if you move offshore, but you're all in America, then they're saying that there's okay, they're not saying this as a blanket statement, but there's arguments that have been made that that's tax avoidance, tax evasion, fraud in some cases. And there's a whole bunch of rules around how you have to account for your foreign business operations and holdings if you reside in America or are an American citizen and pay taxes to the US. So, and that includes your corporations. Now, quick caveat, I think this should be abundantly clear by now, but I'm not an attorney, nor am I a CPA. So everything I'm saying is just my own opinion, not in any way legal or financial advice, of course. But this just won't work in effect. If this actually remains on the books. Now, the unfortunate thing is for 2022 taxes, this might actually be the case because it's tax season and so I really don't know what's going to happen here. They were talking about trying to make an amendment to it in time. Seems like that didn't happen. So we'll have to wait and see. But this is a hugely problematic thing. Anyways, in terms of like,
I read a couple of interesting anecdotes about how this might work and how it might impact companies as well. And one of the things that I stumbled across was a company could fail, like a company could close and then still owe back taxes on this for up to 15 years.
Yeah. So that's possible. They would have to have had a bunch of revenue in excess of expenses, which is, if they're failing, chances are they probably don't have revenue in excess of that. I mean, unless they raise funds. But that's the other problem is no venture capital firm is going to give you investment dollars if you immediately have to lose 30% of it, 35% of it to corporate income tax. Like that's insane. It puts any US entity trying to build in the blockchain space under these rules, essentially non-competitive. Like you cannot compete. If I was a VC, why would I invest in a company that my dollar turns into 65 cents in their pocket, as opposed to a foreign one that my dollar is $1 of firepower for them to try to achieve success? It's hard enough as it is. 90% in the first year fail. Another 90% of the remaining fail in the second year. Like very few companies make it to successful status where venture, actually creates a gain. This makes it orders of magnitude more difficult. You effectively are losing 40% of your already limited firepower because you're only raising what you absolutely need. It's a very short-sighted rule. I don't think they did it intentionally. So I'm going to give policymakers and lawmakers a benefit of the doubt here. At least this is
unlike you.
It is unlike me, but this is so short-sighted that I can't see them doing this on purpose ever. Like anybody, regardless of what side of the debate you're on, would see that this would, without a shadow of a doubt, completely crush any development in the space.
So I'm seeing a few other articles covering the crypto arms race, but not calling it that. Maybe my hilarious hashtag is going to die, but there are quite a few FUD articles about how, FUD for the States, about how Europe and Asia are going to be leaders in blockchain. And we'll get into the Europe one in just a moment, but in terms of Asia, obviously there's BRICS, which we talked about on Friday, and that could be a new world power, a new world order, as a lot of people are saying. But additionally, this comes back to the whole idea of the manufacturers of most of our technology and chips are in Asia. And I find that a really interesting argument as to why they'll be the leader. Can you comment on that a bit more?
Yeah. So it is. First, I'm going to a quick plug, not that they need it from us, but the All In podcast, which is probably the largest business podcast that exists, I think. Chamath was talking on Friday after I watched it on Friday. I think they post it Friday mornings or Thursday night. Anyways, I watched it on Friday, and Chamath was talking about his perception of why he doesn't think that the US dollar will not be the global reserve currency going forward. And I tend to kind of agree with him, although I still think there's definitely a non-zero risk that the US becomes not only not a leader in terms of global currency, but also not a leader in terms of blockchain, which will eventually be the architecture for all of finance. I'm biased, of course, but that kind of seems to be how it's going. And so the question that you asked was, without having the same level and quality of chips and without some of the same technological advances, I mean, we have to assume, yes, of course, they don't have the same, technologies that we currently do, but there are ways to get them. I'm sure. I'm sure they're making a lot of friends globally. We saw Macron there last week. We saw, Xi in Russia. We've seen Brazil. All of these countries, like, they're not all slouches in terms of being able to produce and R&D these types of sophisticated chips. And of course, we're seeing a lot of saber rattling around Taiwan at the moment. I think China is puffing their feathers. I don't know what that means. I think the US is not doing a damn thing to discourage it globally at the moment. There's a perception that they're trying, but I don't think they're doing anything meaningful. Could Asia become the global dominant leader? Maybe. But as a reserve currency, ultimately what happens is at some point, the value of that reserve currency and related risk-free assets like treasuries and all of these other things, which is essentially how debt in the global currencies are denominated, still falls on the creditworthiness and your belief that the governing body is going to do things that are correct for your investment in those currencies. And I think, I don't know who globally thinks that China cares more about everybody else's concerns rather than strictly their own. Now, we shouldn't sleep on this. We shouldn't ignore this, because China, although we receive a lot of, I'm going to call it propaganda as to why China is so terribly bad. I can only imagine the type of propaganda that they receive about how the US is so terribly bad. And I think there's probably some truth to both of them a little bit, but they're probably less bad than we're all led to believe in both cases. And so I think there's maybe some arguments that could be made, not by me, because I don't think this, but people could make some arguments why China could maybe, in fact, be building trust globally. You look at global trade. I saw a really interesting kind of video time lapse of the largest global trade with either the US or China. So if their biggest trading partner was the US, then they were blue. And if their biggest trading partner was China, then they were red. And over the last 3 decades, it went from almost entire blue globally to almost entirely red globally, where there's a net greater amount of global trade with China, with almost every major country in the world, with every major country in the world, and almost every non-major country in the world also. And that, I mean, whether we like it or not, we all did that globalization because of, costs and supply chain and all of this other nonsense, cheap labor.
And I don't know if you have that image, but taxes also. If you take a look at the Cointelegraph made a nice little map for us to summarize. But essentially, if you want to have innovation or emerging technology, probably the Americas is not the place to do that in terms of tax amounts.
Yeah, and there we go. We do have that image. It's essentially this isn't the most descriptive graphic. I mean, taxed.
It's simple.
Yes.
It's simple.
Yeah, it's a very simple, like major economies is not taking into account all the smaller ones, generally speaking. But if you're in a situation where the vast majority of both your business or your personal activities are taxed heavily, and the solution to that is many of these other relatively advanced countries, what are you going to do? Are people willingly going to be paying 30 or 40% income tax or greater in Canada or Australia or the United States when they could simply live in Central America or in Asia or any of these other places and not pay any tax? Now, with your taxes generally comes some benefits, of course. There's a reason you pay no taxes in the BVI and Cayman and Panama and all these other places. And there's a reason that the taxes are high in all these other countries. Fair. But when you're thinking of like global competition in this space, it's something that we can't ignore.
It is interesting to look at this too and consider BRICS. So Brazil, India, China, South Africa.
Yeah.
And see India, China, Brazil on highly taxed. And then.
Well, so that's actually a really good observation. I'm going to unshare so I can see, but it's a really good observation. And I think it's also interesting. So an argument could be made that the countries that are most supportive of crypto at the moment and blockchain are the ones that see dollar signs and are like, holy shit, we could make a whole lot of money from this. As opposed to saying, if we don't engage this, we're going to lose a whole bunch of the brightest minds to other countries, irrespective of potential, tax. If you build a vibrant ecosystem and a vibrant economy, then the taxes make sense. We've seen this for the last couple of centuries. Every time there's a tax cut, if the economic conditions are acceptable, tax revenue actually goes up because there's more productivity, there's more people investing in the space, there's more shit that happens, and your net taxes as a country go up. But there's a lot of kind of warm, fuzzy belief in that. You have to believe that by taking less of a percentage that the market is going to respond because everything else has been encouraging that additional investment and development. Right now in crypto, not only are the taxes prohibitive in most of these jurisdictions, but in the US in particular, there's all these other uncertainties that, we all must be kind of crazy. Like anybody new entering the market today, we're all here already. I live in the US. There's nothing I can do about that. So now we're just trying to navigate it accordingly and trying to be as safe as possible. But if I wasn't in the space and I lived in the US, I don't know. We've already got skeletons in the closet. Hopefully not bad ones, but we've already got path dependencies that we can't change. But for a new project protocol, I don't think I'd start. I don't think I'd start one. No,
I feel like I could segue from that into anything else that we're going to talk about today because everything is so funny. Just for the sake of it, it's interesting that you talk about that because Pew Research just came out.
Pew pew.
I love them. I love reading Pew Research. I'm going to go read this whole paper later. But essentially, they're saying that sentiment in America has dropped about crypto. About 2/3 of people who ever owned crypto still own crypto. Unsurprisingly, dudes between 18 and 50 are the largest holders of crypto and have the highest sentiment. But what's really interesting here is that adoption has actually dropped. And this isn't a surprise to those of us who are in the space because of the bear market and because of the regulations and because of so on and so forth. But I think that if you were somebody who was thinking about entering the space, you would find that surprising.
Yeah, it's definitely surprising. It's something I've talked about a lot. Like this last cycle gave us all this last bull market gave us all the impression that there was a whole new influx of assets and users and all of this. And although I think that happened to a certain extent, I've yet to see any verifiable data that actually proves that. But rather, I've seen data that suggests the opposite, that the vast majority of the increase in total market cap was a function of the prices going up due to the way that AMMs work and trading activity and sentiment. And the rich were getting richer in the space. The poor were getting less poor in the space, I guess. But and that has all since come crashing down to the tune of 95% on most projects, with the exception of Bitcoin, ETH, and a few L1s. But most of the L1s are still down significantly. And so it's not surprising that adoption is down. I mean, a lot of people were burned. I've said this many times that the vast majority of people that were burned were not institutions, but rather retail. And that's been one of the biggest stains on the space, I think, is the indexing to venture capital currently. That's the way that we've all raised money, and that's the way that all of the structures are geared towards, getting venture capital in. But the problem is that those markets or those models by design, not on purpose, but in effect create an environment where retail buys up the assets once they have access to it, and VCs dump on retail. And so we've got a whole bunch of retail, like you said, 2/3 are still holding, 1/3 probably just dumped and cut their losses. Another really important factor, I think, in those statistics is the amount of people that only participated in crypto from a perspective of NFTs. And NFTs are orders of magnitude more volatile, more illiquid than even normal cryptos. So those people that were all in on NFTs at the peak hype, peak froth, I mean, many of those projects are never coming back. So anyways, this sounds super FUDdy, but the reason we're talking about all this, first of all, it's worth noting, we're both in the space and very excited about what's to come. Like, I'm still here building, I'm still here investing. We spend all day, every day, thinking about and working on moving the space forward. So, I mean, all of this FUD that we're talking about, we're just trying to talk about it objectively so that if there is some truth to it, obviously people are kind of made aware, and hopefully we can dispel some of the crazy overhyped headlines and clickbait and stuff. That's the point of this. But anyways, yeah, to me, this doesn't surprise me. Dudes in their, 18 to 50, sure. I mean,
so what's interesting here is the sentiment, right? Is that sentiment is
down.
And part of why I mentioned that is that I do want to give a couple updates on CBDCs. But so on Friday, we talked about central bank digital currencies for 45 minutes. I've had a lot of questions about it since then. I'm happy to answer them. But in the wake of that, there have been a couple of updates. And one is that there's a new CBDC being explored. So instead of 114 countries actively exploring or launching or piloting or engaged in CBDCs, now there's 115. Montenegro just signed on with Ripple, but it's still very early days. It's still very.
Did you just fact check yourself?
Totally.
Awesome.
I did. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of cool that it's just updating. Like, this is a really live current events thing. But in the States, the sentiment surrounding this is atrocious. So even though America hasn't really made any more announcements about having a CBDC, even though the United States haven't taken any further action and they're still in the research kind of phase, a couple of different politicians have decided to make it almost their platform to be anti-CBDC. And I thought that you would love this, JD, because they talk about the slippery slope fallacy, and they talk about it being a really greasy slope that we're going to go down into government control and oversight and overreach, which is what we talked about a lot on Friday. But when we think about the sentiment for crypto, it doesn't help with CBDCs, right?
Yeah. So my thought on this is interesting. So the people that are meaningfully engaged in crypto, many of them will be single issue voters. And so from a political strategy perspective, again, I'm not a political strategist, but this, at least on the surface to me, seems like an interesting strategy. You're not necessarily going to annoy everybody else because either you strongly believe that crypto should be the future and you have pretty strong commitments to why, or you generally don't care. There's not too many people that think crypto is a net super negative other than the Fed and government and some policy people in terms of like its future tech impact on finance. And so from a political strategy perspective, you hate on CBDCs because that's where most of the maxis, most of the people that are already engaged in crypto and are likely single issue voters, you're going to drag them into your camp most likely. Now, we see this with other single issue voting ideas also. Like we see this often on Second Amendment. We see this often on abortion, like a lot of the like obvious major divisive things. Crypto, on the other hand, isn't so divisive. It's actually a better environment to try to grab those single issue voters because you're not alienating the rest by definition. So that's, you got to take some of this with a grain of salt. I'm not sure that RFK Jr. or DeSantis have a deep understanding of this and or a deep understanding of what the solution is. But right now, I think they're trying to suck up some of the single issue voters. That's my opinion on this.
Interestingly, DeSantis actually comments, if you go look at his real comments and not just an article about them, he comments on not having enough information to make good decisions and how other politicians should recognize that. So I don't know, that's kind of a great standpoint.
And I do agree with him entirely. I've been saying this for as long as people will listen to me. I mean, policymakers, lawmakers, and regulators do not have the information. And the problem is that none of us want to go in and give them any information because anybody that does ends up later with a Wells notice for something maybe a little bit unrelated. But like, it's kind of like you're walking in, putting your head in the tiger's mouth, pouring blood all over it and expecting the tiger not to be like,
Your analogies are amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I really thought that one through. But I mean, I don't know. It's just, it's a weird situation. I don't know why there has not been, again, I mean, there's so many priorities in the US right now. The economy is a big problem. We've got social politics that are a hugely divisive thing in America at the moment. We've got a lot of problems in the US. And so crypto is just one of those. For those of us in the space, it's our number one concern. For everybody else, it's probably not a number one concern, which is why they haven't spent extraordinary resources trying to figure this out. But to that point, if you can't regulate something that you don't understand, you can't build laws around things that you don't understand, you can't build products that you completely don't understand the market that they exist in. And so to me, one has to happen with the other. And currently it's not happening that way.
So this leads us into my final question of the day, which is, who is the future of crypto? So from the Pew Research article, it's still white dudes, at least in America, white dudes between 18 and 50. This isn't a surprise, but it does bring forward the question of how do we onboard new people into the space when the sentiment is so bad? But a number of the other articles talk about multi-chain abilities and the ETH fork coming up, Chapella, which is in one day, I think it's tomorrow, and how that is going to onboard institutions, especially in terms of staking and yield and what have you. So is the future of crypto, do we need to worry about the sentiment because we want a retail case, or is the future of crypto going to end up being CBDCs that are bank to bank and institutions?
It's a great question. Where I'd like to see the future of crypto and where the future of crypto is going might be two different things. I think that crypto in many ways was established. The reasons it was established in the first place are not necessarily the most powerful things that, that are underneath the hood from a blockchain perspective now, in my opinion. But initially, crypto was created and imagined because the incumbents in the finance space do a lot of things in a not transparent way and do a lot of things that probably aren't for the net benefit of the client. It's mutually exclusive. We win or the client wins. That decision is pretty easy to make when you're sitting in a board of directors meeting talking about your bonuses and so on. And so right now, what's happening, what appears to be happening, is the only path forward is for incumbents, for the large financial institutions to get proper regulation. Even companies as large as Coinbase are struggling. Coinbase, Kraken. Meanwhile, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, all of these large investment banks and large banking institutions, Citi, they're lining up patents like crazy. They're getting, all of these licenses quietly in the background. And I mean, in my opinion, it's going to be a CBDC and major bank dominated world, and we'll end up with pretty much more of the same thing if we don't have meaningful market forces that drive competition. Mm-hmm. And right now, that's the path we're going towards. The future of crypto, in my opinion, requires both retail and institutional adoption, the same way that global banking requires both. A lot of your deposits, of course, come from institutions, but a lot of them also come from retail. Like, you can't ignore the retail markets. And what we consider institution in TradFi now doesn't necessarily need to be institutional in crypto. That's part of the benefit, is that you don't need an institutional middleman if we make these user experiences and onboarding simple enough. And so to your point, multi-chain, I think, is going to go a long way. I think there's a lot of resources being put into wallet infrastructure and multi-chain infrastructure, bridging, messaging, cross-chain messaging. There's a lot of very well-funded platforms and developers that are building on this, and I think that'll make a huge difference. The 18 to 50-year-old white dudes in the US, that's all tech. Like, that's not just crypto. That's like pretty much every tech. Yeah. And when you go from tech being a niche product to being societally integral, you have to have adoption from greater swaths of people. And usually the friction point is complexity. So the more we can bring complexity down and the relative value proposition up in terms of ease of use, transparency, personal liberation, et cetera, composability, as long as we make these things simple to use, then we will get more adoption from greater people, and the sentiment will go up. But right now, sentiment's negative because it's confusing, it's complicated. There's a lot of weird, disjointed parts still between centralized entities, FTX, BlockFi, Three Arrows, Alameda, Terra Luna, like all of these things that are mainly centralized, and their relationship with decentralized. And I think we haven't made enough of a case to separate the two publicly. I think a lot of people conflate them as being the same. They're not. They're not the same at all. The centralized institutions is actually, to a great extent, the antithesis of what crypto was and blockchain was developed for. Now, strategically, I can see what Coinbase is doing. Build a huge market in a centralized fashion, and then eventually make an attempt, once the rules are clear enough, to go on chain, which is what they're doing with Base. So I can see what they're doing, but there's not a distinction there that is commonly understood. And I think that's important. I think we should think of this as, what is the future? What parts of crypto aren't working and leading to bad sentiment? And that is the same shit that happens in traditional finance. It's the same shit. It's the same mismanagement. It's the same misalignment of incentives that happens in traditional finance that we're seeing being the egg on the face of crypto in these centralized things. There's some decentralized things that have also created negative sentiment, but the vast majority has to do with centralized actors. And that's a shame. And if the regulators and policymakers and lawmakers can't see that we're just going to get more of the same shit if we only enable incumbents to enter the space in a scalable and meaningful way, we're going to get more of the same shit. Now, the devil in some cases is easier to make friends with than the devil you don't. Fair enough. I understand that. But the devil we know is the reason that blockchain was developed in the first place. So I guess we'll see.
So that's the FUD on blockchain finance for today. That's all of it.
There's a lot of good shit that's happening. Maybe we'll talk. Maybe we'll make our. What was the Tuesday thing that we were joking about last week?
It'll be Token Tuesday.
Token Tuesday. Yeah. Oh shit. Maybe
we'll
do Token Tuesday. We'll have to think of another one that's like I can't think of anything. I was going to say Positive Wednesday, but that doesn't have a good ring to it.
It doesn't even alliterate.
Wonderful Wednesdays,
Okay.
or
I'll do it tomorrow.
Winning Wednesdays, or I don't know. We'll figure something out.
JD.
Anyway, what?
Like, subscribe, hit the bell. Follow us on Spotify. I shortened the episodes a little bit there. And you can listen at 2 times speed.
I talk pretty fast. 2 times speed might be a little tough. But everybody, go FUD yourself. Kiara, go FUD yourself.
JD.
Talk to y'all tomorrow.